Got it. Okay, thank you very much for coming to the meeting, and I welcome you all on behalf of the Municipal Heritage Committee. The first item of business is to adopt the agenda. May I have a mover for the adoption of the agenda, please? Julia, seconder, Ian. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest for the items that are on our agenda this evening? There being none, I can't see you, Ian, but I'm inferring that you have no pecuniary interest. So there being none, let's move on to the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting held on January the 13th. Has everyone had a chance to read the minutes? All right. Any errors, additions, or deletions from the minutes? There being none, may I have someone move the passing of the minutes? Councillor Ashmore, any seconder, please? Skip, all those in favor? Presuming Ian's in favor, carried. Are you having trouble too, Ian, or for me, you're coming and going off the screen? Hey, Daisy, welcome.
Hi, no, I had to switch rooms. There was another meeting happening in another room of the house, and I was having difficulty hearing people.
Okay, thank you.
Over my father's coughing.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm here now.
All right. All those in favor of the minutes? Carried. All right, presentations and deputations. We have a wonderful guest tonight with us, Angela Fornelli, and she is from Corporate Records and Archives. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to turn the microphone over to you. May I ask that people, when you are not speaking, could you put your microphones on mute so that it doesn't carry over into the recording?
Well, thank you very much for, just make sure I'm unmuted. Thank you very much for having me. I think this has been a long time coming. I know I was supposed to present to the committee, I think back in 2020, and unfortunately I fell very ill. So I thank you for inviting me back, even though I think I kind of stood you up. So my apologies for that. So I just want to explain a little bit about the Corporate Records and Archival Services, more the Archival Services program that the city is currently setting up. So they hired me way back in January of 2020 to act as city archivist and to establish a municipal archival program. We've been very lucky that the Kawartha Lakes Library has stepped in where there was when there was no municipal-led program for archives, and the library has been doing a wonderful job, and they have been archiving and working with other institutions in the city of Kawartha Lakes who have archival collections to maintain the private records of the people of the city of Kawartha Lakes, but there has been no municipal program. My job primarily is to establish a archival program for the corporate records, so for the municipal government records of the city of Kawartha Lakes. So that is what I have been working on. I unfortunately was off work from October of 2020 to March of 2021. So in the time preceding that and since then, I've been building the program. The archive policy was passed not too long ago, and that established the City of Kawartha Lakes Archives as the holders of the municipal memory, the municipal government records of the government records, sorry. And it also established that as the holder of the government records, it's not that it precludes us from taking private records and other organizational corporate records, but that primarily we are set up to maintain and preserve the corporate municipal government records. So I have been working in setting up our big thing that's just going through is the Archives Acquisition Management Directive, which is just going through its routing and its vetting process. And in that establishes our mandate. It establishes what are the parameters for which we will collect records, how we will collect government records, how we would go about collecting private records or other business organizational records. One of the big things I will say is that I am a firm believer in that records need to be where they best serve the community. So there is no plan for us to go in and take records away from those historical societies that have worked hard to collect those records, that have been collecting the history of, even though now they're a part of the City of Kawartha Lakes, primarily before they were their own entities. What I would like to do is to have an overarching umbrella where we at least know what records are in what communities and who has what, and work with the library archives and the old jail museum archives, and just to know what records are out there, who has what, and for us to work in a collaborative manner. Part of my job is also to go to those institutions that have archival records and be able to give my advice as an archivist. I have been doing this job since 2007. I received my master's from the University of Dundee in 2015. I have done lots of different work in different aspects of archiving. I've worked with preservation, conservation. I have a weird affinity for copyright law. I just find it, as it pertains to archival records, I find it really fascinating. I just, I think one of the things that was really amazing is that when the city built my position, they wanted it to be a collaborative one. They didn't want it to be as the municipality would be the holder and owner of these records, but that it recognized that records have different homes and can be in different institutions, and that my job was more just to work and to try and to make bridges and work collaboratively, as well as building our own program. So that's sort of what I have been working on. I have been very lucky to work with Ian on a various couple of little projects now. We've also been working on a project with the LCVI school. We've been working at introducing myself to the various historical societies and other institutions within the City of Kawartha Lakes. And just trying to find out what the needs are, what people, where they need help, and what we can do. And as the program grows and expands, and we're out of the planning stages and into the implementation stages, hopefully having some good projects with some of the various other institutions and organizations within the Kawartha Lakes. So that's essentially it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Angela. And I know that you will be receiving an invitation to come and speak to the board of the Kawartha Lakes Culture and Heritage Network, which will hopefully plug you in with the members of that network who do hold archives and are in need of your services. So I think in that way, you're going to be able to link up with a lot of others besides the official city ones.
Yes, yes. And we have made there have been some small inroads. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of put a bit of a kibosh on that a little bit, but it's, especially with things that are happening within the archival community, I think it's really important that we build as many strong connections as we can, and and just serve the records as best as we can and preserve the history.
I know that I was pleased to hear that the city does not intend to take ownership of archives that exist in private institutions, and that will relieve a lot of the members who are afraid to use your services, and hopefully will build some of those bridges for you.
I hope so. I hope so. And I think that is a big thing, is sort of, I think sometimes people feel we're going to sort of break down the doors, grab the records and run. And that is certainly not the intention at all. Records need to be where they serve the community the best.
Is there any provision within the city for things that are in controlled environments, which some of the archives may need?
Sorry, are you talking about sort of the preservation and storage of the
I'm
record?
talking about basic things like humidity and
Yes, and that is something, we are very lucky within the city that we have the record center, which is temperature, humidity, and light controlled. One of the things that I hope to do is to be able to work with institutions. There are grants, there are funds available out there for people to hopefully be able to maintain their records in sort of optimal conditions. But one of the things that I've sort of started working a little bit is helping to guide institutions that have their archival records and what are the best environment to keep them in, even if it's little things like keeping them, if you're displaying them in such a manner that they aren't in direct light, having display copies, things like that, and how we can best maintain the records where they're at a constant temperature, a constant humidity, and yes, all those other fun variables that can help to degrade records as the years go by.
well, it's been especially bad for our other members of the Heritage and Culture Network because their locations have been closed and therefore even heating is a question. So
The main thing is if they're kept at as even a temperature as possible. It doesn't matter if it's cold or hot. And if there are changes that are gradual, such as happens with the seasons as we move into spring, it's those sudden where it goes from really hot to really cold. Those are what break down the fibers of records and can be detrimental to them. So hopefully, even if those institutions haven't been able to get to their records and maybe they haven't had the heating on, it should be a slow temperature change for those records, and hopefully it'll be mitigated as much as possible.
I'd like to open it up for any questions from the committee members. Ron?
Thanks, Ethel. To Angela, thanks for your report there. Do you have access to the former municipalities of City Kawartha Lakes, Victoria County, like our corporation, Kawartha Lakes? It's not that old, only 21
Yes.
years old, but Victoria County is obviously very many years old and a lot of history. And we had many townships and towns and villages. For example, just a couple of examples like Bob's Township, Emily Township, Village of Omimi, Town of Lindsay, that sort of thing. Do you have all the records for those former municipalities?
We have the majority of them. A lot of those records are in the record center, which right now the Municipal Archives is, and that's why it's very good. My position is both corporate records and archival services, so I oversee both programs. A lot of those predecessor municipality records are with the city of Kawartha Lakes. Now, there are some that are outside of our control. There are some that are at the Trent University Archives, some are in Peterborough, some are with the provincial archives. One of the jobs that I have on my many to-do list is a repatriation project. I had to wait until our archival policy and the acquisition management directive have been established, because those are what will give us not the authority, but the only records we will ask be with the municipality are predecessor municipality records, because they are still active records within the records management program. We have tax records that go back 150 years because they are permanent records, part of the active record collection. So those records and the records that are at, as I say, Trent University, we are going to actively try and repatriate them to them. We just had to wait until all the pieces are in place to be able to do so.
Okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else? Julia?
I have a question for you. I'm just curious about how accessible the records are. Are there some that would be considered private records that, let's say, I just want to know, how would you divide that up? Just because I'm not familiar.
So it goes by privacy legislation. We would not release any information about an individual who is alive or has only been deceased for less than 50 years. Information about people who have been deceased for 50 plus years, that information we would release. So if somebody were to come and want to see information, then we would try and vet the information as much as possible. In those cases where we're not sure, where there's gray area, then I will confer with Joel Watts, who is the privacy person for the city of Kawartha Lakes. And generally, we will always err on the side of caution. I am a firm believer in people's private information is their information, and we protect it. It is, it's given to us for a specific purpose, and we have to really respect the purpose for which we have that information. And we also don't want people to lose faith in the fact that we won't protect their information. So we very closely follow privacy legislation that's in place in those instances.
But if, for example, we wanted to find out about a particular heritage home and who owned it at the beginning and so on, what would be the criteria then? Is there a
so we can release the information as long as it's not about current owners or about anybody who has lived in that house and has been deceased for less than 50 years. So
50 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries.
Any other questions for Angela? There being none, then, Angela, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. And I hope that we will be seeing you in other venues soon.
I'm sure you will. And thank you very much for having me. And it's been a pleasure meeting you all.
Have a good night.
Have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you.
Athol, you're muted.
The next item on our agenda is
Oh,
the archives presentation, and I will ask Emily to introduce that to us.
So that's just the report saying that Angela is going to make a presentation. If we just have a motion to receive that and Angela's presentation, that'd be great.
All right, may I have a mover? Ian, so moves. May I have a seconder? Julia moves. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. The reports, the Municipal Heritage Committee correspondence is basically that which I was instructed to send out from our last meeting. So in my policy of being transparent, you have a copy of all pieces of communication that I do on behalf of the committee. Is there any question about it? Is there anything else there, Emily, you wish to speak about?
On the correspondence, no, if we can just receive it for information, that'd be great.
Okay. May I have someone move the acceptance of this report? I have Skip and then Julia. So all those in favor? Carried. The next item is our report from Emily about her events of the past month. So I turn that heritage planning update over to Emily.
Thanks, Ethel. So just a few things on here. So the updates on council and committee of the whole. So those amendments to the delegated authority bylaw, just to negotiate extensions, those passed, and the amendment to the designation bylaw at 1201 Salem Road that we talked about in the fall, that also passed. So that's great. Committee of the whole, which is next Tuesday. I've got 2 reports going forward with recommendations from the committee. One is with regard to the heritage inventory framework. So I'll be doing a presentation for council on that, just to give them an overview on the project and how that's all going to work. And the other is the objection to the listing at 1824 County Road 46 that the correspondence in the previous reports about. So those will go to the committee of the whole February 8th and then to council 2 weeks later at that meeting for the council meeting. The next thing is, so this is something that has been on my radar for the past couple of years, is putting an archaeological management plan together for the city. So this is a big policy piece that I'm starting to work on in the background. So I'm just doing kind of a needs assessment on this right now, but we'll be working on preparing an archaeological management plan and associated policies for the city. So that's really good news. Since, as I'm sure you know, it's a bit patchwork. Oh, Daisy, no, stop. Okay. Sorry, I have a visitor here. So I'll provide updates to the committee as that continues. And then before the plan goes to council, the committee will see that as well. So this is a multi-year project. So be prepared to get some information on that over the next little while. The next one, this is a good news story. I have 2 students from Trent who are starting working with me right now, which is great. And they're going to be doing a research project on Sturgeon Point. So that'll be something we're doing this semester. It's just until April. And I'm hoping that they will be able to present to the committee what they're doing for that. So that's a nice project for them. And hopefully we will have some more Trent students in future. I've been working with their community-based research center, I think that's what it's called, on getting some students connected in with heritage projects here. So that'll be some good news for later. And that's that for the heritage planning update. If anyone has any questions, now's a good time.
There being no questions, may I ask for someone to move the acceptance of this report for information? I have Ian and Ron. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you, Emily. Then we have the repeal and replacement of designating bylaw number 50 or bylaw on 50 Victoria Avenue North in Lindsay, which is of course the old jail.
Sure, so I'll run through the
Great.
background on this one too. So when we brought forward the recommendation to council regarding the demolition of the old jail walls, one of the things that I included in the staff report was that if council did approve the demolition, that we should revisit the bylaw, because as I'm sure everybody remembers from when we reviewed that, the bylaw for that particular property is quite bad. So council did approve that demolition, although that's not what the committee recommended, but also directed staff to present a recommendation regarding the amendment of the designating bylaw by the end of Q1. So that's March. So that's the next meeting. So here it is for the committee to have a look at. So instead of amending the bylaw, which is what we would normally do for this kind of situation, My recommendation is to repeal and replace it. And the reason for this is because it's a pre-amalgamation bylaw. So putting on a City of Fourth Lakes amendment to a Town of Lindsay bylaw, it just gets really messy from an administrative standpoint. The disadvantage of doing a repeal and replace as opposed to an amendment is it does open it up to a third-party appeal. But I think that's probably unlikely just because it's a community building. It's also owned by the city. So it should be fine from an appeal standpoint. So I have drafted a new bylaw for the property, which is attached to your agenda, and you'll see that it's much more in keeping with how we actually do bylaws now as opposed to the old one. Like it has heritage attributes in it, and it has discussion of why the property is significant, which the other one was missing. So this is the new bylaw that I've pulled together. Jorg has had a look at it. He's happy with it, and the Old Jail Museum has seen it as well. So they know that this is coming. So there's no big surprises for the museum either, as they're the tenant of the building. So everybody's in the loop on this particular item.
Do I have any questions? My big concern, of course, was the museum. So now that you tell us that they've been involved and they approve of this, I have no problem with accepting it.
Yeah, so I met with some folks from the museum. Oh gosh, it was back in November, I think. I met with them just to let them know that this process was starting. And then I circulated them on the draft for this in December and didn't receive comments back. So we're going to assume that they're okay with it, but they do know that the process is happening. And they're fine with that. Sorry, just a second. Hey.
Any comments or questions from the committee? Ron?
Thanks. Doesn't it, Emily, have to do with this whole culture arts center that they were proposing? Like they were proposing $4 or $5 million renovation or expansion of the old jail and the courtyard and everything in its area. So there was a whole big project that they had envisioned. Like, is this whole plan? Are you aware of all that, or have they actually communicated with you, just sort of kept you in the loop, or kept other people in the loop? I know when we went there, we just learned of it in June, like of this whole plan that they had for the whole building, the whole area, the footprint of the area. Did they discuss that with you, like what their future plans are and how much it's going to cost and who's going to be fundraising for all that that they're proposing there, all the building and all the cultural center that they're proposing, if you call it that?
Yeah, I'm aware of the discussions around that. I think at the moment they're just that, really ideas that are being floated around and various discussions that are happening. I mean, the cultural center feasibility study, it's still ongoing. So there's no budget allocated for it at the city. There's no concrete plan. So I think at the moment it's really just discussion for something that the museum might like to see happen in future. But at the moment, there's no concrete plan for that to happen. Yeah.
Is it dependent on this cultural master plan in order for that to be done first before any decisions are made, or how does that work into this whole?
Maybe I can step in here a little
Sure,
bit
yeah.
and try to answer that.
Sure.
At the present moment, the task force has employed a group to do the assessment as to whether this is feasible. And there is no commitment on the part of the task force at this moment that it has anything to do with the property at the old jail or anywhere else at the moment. And it's still out there as to whether this cultural center is feasible or not. And if it is a cultural center, what does that entail? So this is still all under discussion with the task force. And at the present moment, there are no recommendations. There are only fact-finding issues. And that's the best answer I think I can give you, Ron, as to an update. And yes, the task force is very mindful of the cultural master plan of the city.
So no there hasn't been a decision on whether that's where the location is going to be? Okay,
None,
that's fine.
none at all.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. The reason I can give you that report is I'm the vice president of the task force, so the information is coming from the task force when I give you that answer. Okay, any other questions? There being none, can we form a motion? How would you like us to phrase this? Is a little bit more than for information. This is to ask Emily to go ahead with the repeal of the current bylaw and to implement the new replacement bylaw. Is that correct, Emily?
Yeah, and that the recommendation be forwarded to council.
Yeah. So may I have a mover for that decision? I have Ian. May I have a seconder? I have Ron. All those in favor? The only objection I see is maybe Daisy. However, it's carried.
I'm sorry about my my second wheel here. She's
Your assistant is
yeah, she's hanging
misbehaving.
out with.
All right. So that was carried, Emily. So we're moving on now, which is another discussion about the same property. And it's item 4.4 on page 37 to 44 of your agenda. So I guess, Emily, you could lead us through this one as well. But I would personally like to deal with the letter from the Victoria County Historical Society first and get that out of the way so that we can have our discussion unencumbered. And it is my recommendation to the committee that we receive the letter from the Victoria County Historical Society for information. This being that most of the comments within this letter relate to their landlord and the decisions of their landlord, and they're not ours at all. So my opinion is that we should make a motion to receive it simply for information. Is there any discussion? May I have someone make that motion, please? I have Julia and Ian. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. So now when we have our discussion of, that I'm going to hand over to Emily to lead, I believe we should be able to make our comments and recommendations from this Municipal Heritage Committee, if there are any, on this plan.
Thanks, Athol. So sorry. I'm going to pull up the site plan here. So this is what Jorg presented you guys with at the last meeting. And just to reiterate, there's no budget for this. This is really just, as he said, a thinking piece. So just providing a little bit of a starting point for discussion for what happens to this space once the walls come down, which they will shortly. So what I think might be appropriate is if the committee had some specific comments or ideas, things they might want to see in that space, it would make sense to communicate those through the chair to Jorg, so that he kind of knows where the committee stands on this. And if it does go forward to looking for budget or preparing a more concrete site plan, that he kind of has an idea of what the committee is looking for, what it thinks might be a good idea, how the space could be used, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. All right. So there is the site, the concept that Jorg presented everybody with for discussion. And this, I mean, this is really just a discussion. It's not committing the committee to anything. It's not a heritage permit. It's just really more of a brainstorming and chit chatting about the space kind of discussion.
Well, Ian and I had a conversation earlier, and Ian, why don't you let the committee know about your concern about the gates remaining in place? And we can start from there.
Yeah, okay. So if you look at the northernmost courtyard, the one closest to Colburn Street, I don't know if Emily, if you can zoom in or not, because it's a bit faint. I may have to squint here. Anyway, it says retain existing wooden gates. So those are the big gates, the big double door gates that you see if you drive or walk down that stretch of Colburn Street. Those gates are very tall. And if you look at other parts of this drawing, it says that where existing sections of the wall will remain in situ, either existing sections or small square pillars of that wall, they will come into a height of about 5 feet. If a fence, whether a real wrought iron fence, which would look very pretty, or a sort of a artificial iron fence goes in, that would come to a height of 4 feet. Those gates must be at least 9, 10, 11 feet high, possibly. I would say maybe 10, possibly 12. And if they were retained, presumably the steel and wooden and concrete framework around them would also be retained. And it would be sort of like sticking up in towering above everything else. And I just think that aesthetically, that would look very strange. And in terms of context, it would also look a bit daft. About 22 years ago, there was a factory building on Lindsay Street North, the old shaft machine building, which was torn down, unfortunately. And for many years afterwards, they retained a portion of the wall that came up to a height of about 5 feet or so. And then that wall kind of fell apart. It was actually part of the facade of the building, I think. And they, if you go down there now, there are a couple of brick posts that I think use reclaimed bricks from that old wall. There are some gates there now, but again, those gates are more in keeping with the height of the posts that and the wall that was retained. So I guess my concern with this drawing is it says retain the existing gates, but and I know it's hard looking at a one-dimensional drawing, bird's eye view, but they're going to tower over the sections of wall that are being kept, and I just think that would look a bit strange and possibly pose some safety and structural risks as well.
So one of the things I think we could make comment on is that since the intention is to retain the gates on the Colburn Street face of the property, that the structures surrounding the existing gates be appropriate to the height of the gates as they exist. And I think we can leave it at that kind of a comment, because that should be picked up by anybody who's architecturally involved, because 5-foot wall next to a 11-foot gate is kind of awkward. So I think it's going to be a decision for all of us putting in input as to whether you want to have those massive gates and then what looks like a 4-foot wrought iron fence on most of the rest of the facade, with a bit of 5-foot brick wall next to the gates. That's what's shown here on this plan from an architectural point of view. And it's extremely awkward. Besides, since it says within there that the north exercise yard is going to be a program space for the museum, I don't know that they would want to put on programs that are that exposed to the sidewalk. So my recommendation is that where the gates are to exist, so should the walls. Because if I were putting on programs and everybody walking by on the sidewalk could look at, yell in, stare through the gates, I find that an awkward programming space. So if it's to be a programming space, I believe it should be developed as a programming space. Anyone got comments about that? Julia?
Yes. Well, first of all, I was very pleased that they are attempting to preserve the wooden gates in terms of the heritage value. I completely understand what Ian is saying in terms of if they leave it the way it is now. This isn't even designed really yet. This is just like a starting point. I had an idea that it would be quite beneficial to add something like they're going to do down in Victoria Park, where they're going to have shade structures. And now that you brought this up, I think they could put some shade structures like a pergola type thing or whatever at a proper height that might match the gate. And then it would be visually more appealing, and also it would provide some shade, something to that effect. They could develop something like that. I would like to see something like that elsewhere as well. It was mentioned in the letter, which I agree with you is not our concern. However, the general idea that they needed tents for events, perhaps they could look at something permanent for shade and and rain even. That would be my suggestion to that.
Because one of the other things I think is a question is if the gates remain, are they to remain functional or are they just a decorative flat surface? So I think there's a lot of discussion relating to this programming space that they're talking about here.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think it's important to know whether they intend those gates to be functional or not. And if they're functional, that puts forward a whole other kettle of fish for architects because they structurally then have to have different supports and structures. Ian?
So just a comment about those gates. When you walk by on the outside, yes, they do look wooden, but that wood is really just a veneer. I think if you go inside, and I've seen these gates many times from the inside, they're metal. So a question that I have, and maybe this is something Emily could look into, is the age of those gates. Were they part of the original brick wall structure that was demolished in the late 1980s or circa 1990? And were they taken out and then just sort of put back in after the new wall went up? Or is that wood just sort of plastered onto or integrated into a gate that is maybe considerably newer than we think it is? Because if it's only a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old gate that has been made to look old with wood, then I wouldn't be upset if it was taken away. But if those gates have a history, and I suspect that they may, going back beyond the current wall structure, then that's something that we as a committee, I think, should take into consideration. And if they do have to go, a question that I have is, could the wood on them be reclaimed somehow and integrated into a display either in the museum or out somewhere in the courtyard? Perhaps maybe the wood could grace like a modern door or something elsewhere, so that the wood itself would be retained and perhaps given some interpretation. But I think trying to discern the age of the gates is kind of important here, because if they're really old and part of the original wall structure that is long gone, that's really interesting and important. But if they were just installed as part of the new build, then that may be a different discussion.
Julia?
I would just like to add with regards to the gate that I believe that it would not be necessary to have them functioning, given that the walls have come down and there would be an iron fence or in the other area, which could also have a functioning gate, which would be far more easy to open. I'd like that statement. I'd like to say that.
One of the things that I was wondering about, and it hinges on something that Ian just said, and that is maintaining the gates, but not necessarily as gates. Whether they could be part of what I would like to see in this property is a memorial to the people who died there and the people who lived there in the poorhouse, as well as the prisoners who were there in the jail. So a memorial to those three entities somewhere within that grounds that had public access. Can you go back to the full screen of this thing, Emily?
How's that?
So, that's better. I'm thinking particularly if you, can you use a pointer on this, Emily?
Can you see my mouse?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you bring that up here to the corner of the building on Victoria Street? Up here in this area where it shows two little trees and an L-shaped wall.
Up here, the little hand is
lost
sitting on
him.
top of the tree.
Somewhere in this area so that it's visible from the parking that's existent at the museum or at the old jail itself. So it's sort of in the corner here between the old jail, the new parking lot, and the City of Kawartha Lakes Human Resources Department. That somewhere in this area where you can't see my pointer, but it's, yeah, you've got your hand there in the right place now.
Okay,
Somewhere
good.
in that area, a memorial that can be seen from the front of the old jail building. The memorial could be formed by sections of the wall remaining and maybe having the gates put there as well against the wall as a memorial. Something in that area would be visible from the parking lot of the old jail and would tell a story. Whereas I'm concerned that if a memorial was put in the museum exercise yard, it wouldn't be visible to the public. Ian?
So I like that idea, but where Emily just had her pointer, if you stood at that parking lot to the immediate south of the museum and to the immediate west of the Human Resources building, and you looked north, you would see a chain link fence with sort of, I think, HVAC type equipment behind it, or electrical equipment. I can't remember which it is. And I mean, historically, this drawing has it kind of backwards. The exercise yard was and is where this parking lot is proposed. Most, in my experience, taking people through the museum some years ago, I would take them out to the center courtyard And then we would go down into the south courtyard where the parking area is proposed. And very rarely would we go into the north courtyard. What about the center courtyard? Like, would that be an appropriate place? Because that is, after all, where they did hang people and where potentially people may still be buried. And I think that would be the first thing that visitors exiting the museum from the rear would see. I think if it was in the south courtyard, it would have to be either fairly centralized or, against either north or south, but not in a corner, especially in the corner where it would sort of, I think, not be hidden, but it would only be visible from inside. It wouldn't be visible from the parking lot because there's chain link fencing and other stuff. But I think a memorial is an excellent idea, and certainly, at least symbolically, gates have historically been used to symbolize, death and the movement of people from one realm to another, as it were.
My feeling is, Ian, that it shouldn't be in a courtyard at all. I'm saying it should be where the hand is right now, which is visible from the front of the building, from the parking lot on the south side of the building. So I'm externalizing it, not internalizing it, because if the museum is closed or they decide not to do programming in the courtyards, it would be invisible to everybody. And I feel that this memorial should be visible.
Just to jump in there quickly, I mean, this is really a high level discussion at the moment, so it may just be worthwhile to say that's publicly accessible and visible, and then hash out the details when we're actually at a point when this might be happening.
I agree, and I love hash. Corned beef hash especially. You can tell I'm getting hungry. Anyway, I think it's okay to phrase it like that, Emily, that the committee strongly feels that there should be a memorial, a significant memorial that is visible to the public. If that sort of says what you're thinking.
Yeah, that sounds good. Then it just gives staff an idea of what the committee wants, and then we can, if and when there's budget for this to happen, we can drill down into specifics at that time.
The only reason I mentioned it now was because it would be a use for the gates. Not necessarily leaving them in place, but using them elsewhere on the grounds. So perhaps we can put in the report that we have some problem with the gates remaining in place with 5-foot walls and 4-foot fences.
Yeah, I've got that in the notes, so we can pass that along for sure.
Okay. Any other comments about the concept? Because this is basically a conceptual drawing. Julia?
I just would like to say that I'm not upset with the parking they added. They've actually lost 3 spots, and they've added 9, so they only got 6 more parking spots. But I would definitely not like to see the exercise yard, the rest of it, converted to parking. But the way it is now, where it's open for other development, that's fair. But that's just what I want to say. It like that stated. Do not want to see more parking in there.
All right, I feel we can include that comment as well. Ian?
Just a very brief comment about the parking. If any of you have been down to Guelph and have been up to the Church of Our Lady on the hill, it's surrounded by asphalt, and it still looks beautiful and very remarkable, but it seems almost out of place with all that pavement and parking around it. When you stand in the south courtyard where this proposed parking area is in the drawing, and look up at the south facade of the old jail part. It's really quite beautiful. All the stonework and such going straight up 3 floors. If you stand in the north courtyard, the north facade at the back of the jail is partially obscured by an addition, a flat roofed addition that was put on in about 1982. There was an attempt in 1982 to make the wings, the new wings at the north and the south, resemble the original structure. Stone was used, but it's not the same. And I think if I had my sort of preference, and if additional parking had to be put in somewhere, I would rather see it at the north than at the south, just because it would aesthetically, I think, preserve the 3-story facade of the south part of the building against lawn of the original exercise yard. And then in the north yard, you would have the more utilitarian new building, which is currently museum offices, against the asphalt parking. But that's just more of a personal aesthetic preference.
I agree with the aesthetic, Ian, but they won't capture as many spots there.
No.
So I guess we could put something in there. Consider placing the parking at the north aspect of the building instead of the south, to preserve the 3-story impression of the brick building,
Or at least
stone building, sorry.
or at least expand or slightly constrict or condense the proposed parking space, so you have a decent expanse of grass beneath the south facade of the building, which would maybe be a compromise. I don't know.
So I think we could ask them to reimagine this so that the more attractive 3-story stonework of the south facade be preserved. And leave it at that. Is that comfortable with everyone? Julia is shaking her head no, so speak up, Julia.
I disagree with moving the parking to the north end, because I think that is a great opportunity. The north end is a great opportunity to even showcase the building, which we now will see from the street. Presently, there's parking everywhere. That's the only place there isn't parking. Even if you don't put the new parking where Ian is saying he doesn't like it, there's still parking everywhere else. So that is the one thing I think is quite attractive, that there is no parking on the north side. And that could be a very beautiful and like a welcoming area for the public. I think it could be very lovely, actually.
I agree with Julia's statement about that. I guess the gist of where I'm going with this is the more green space you can have, the better. And I think having green space in an area that best showcases the architecture of the original building is always a good idea. And I think if push came to shove, I would rather see green space adjacent to the more attractive parts of the old jail structure, and have parking lots sort of more adjacent to the perhaps less attractive aspects of the structure. But I know that some kind of practical and pragmatic compromise would have to be reached. So I like what Julia is saying. It's certainly not up to me, and it's a discussion that the city is going to have.
Well, at this point, it's not up to any of us. It's just conceptual. So I think we can reserve that conversation until we actually come to grips with what this space is going to be. Ron?
Just to comment on all that parking, like what Ian had said, you're giving up green space, and I was always under the impression that the jail, the group there, were wanting to have coaches. They wanted to have buses on the north side, And that's where the parking was going to be, or at least the offloading of tourists and people coming in to visit the museum. But I don't know. I don't really like the idea of paving over these grave sites either. So I mean, I'm not going to support this one way at all, because I voted against this whole demolition in the first place, and I really in good conscience can't approve this, what they're trying to do. So I'm sorry, but I can't support it either way. But you guys can support it, which you can support it or not support it, but I'm not going to support it.
All right, Skip.
Just a question, because anytime I've ever walked by there, and admittedly, it's mostly been on COVID, I've never seen the existing parking lots anywhere near full. So why do we need to put more parking in the first place over green space?
There isn't enough parking there. So when people are actually in the offices, as people be transitioning back to, there is not enough parking here. I don't think I've ever parked in the lot. The last time I parked there, I parked like 2 blocks away. There's just not enough staff parking or for members of council, particularly when there's council meetings. There's not enough parking, which is, it's a big problem that I think our building and property staff are trying to address with this new parking area. So that's why they're adding new parking in. There definitely is a capacity issue in this lot.
Ian?
I'll just again briefly address the parking situation. Having worked at the old jail museum before, it's something that always frustrated personnel there when you would have city staff, councilors, members of the fire department even, going and parking in spaces that could otherwise be used for museum visitors. So I used to ride my bicycle when I was working there, and I would park it out front. But on a busy summer day at the height of the tourist season, people who are driving from out of town sometimes can't find a place to park because the parking lots are full of cars belonging to people working at City Hall or at the Human Resources Department. So that's always been a perpetual challenge. And Ron talked about a place where buses would stop off. And logically, I think the Colburn Street side would be that. I mean, can you imagine a large coach type bus driving in off Francis Street and trying to navigate the somewhat narrow path between the parking spaces and City Hall and then turning left into this new parking area? I'm sure it could be done, but it might be awkward. And I know this committee's mandate is not parking, but it's certainly a conversation that's going to have to be had. How do you provide more parking, balance it with the need for some green space, balance it all with the heritage aesthetic of the whole block, really? So that's just some comments that I had about the parking situation. The big parking lot at the south, sort of southwest of this drawing, sometimes that's used by museum visitors, but sometimes people who live around the area park their cars in that lot. So certainly there's going to have to be some much more in-depth conversation about parking and sort of who parks where and at what times, and how this can work out in the interests of both the city and the museum.
Personally, my feeling is that's to be worked out between the museum and the city. It's not really my heritage discussion. As long as we can preserve the heritage and the aspect of the 4 facades of the building, that's what I'm concerned about, and that we can memorialize the function of the building and those that gave their lives there. Those to me are heritage aspects. Parking is not one of them unless it intrudes on those aspects. So I think we should not address parking in our comments. Any other comments? All right. Does that give you enough to be going on with, Emily?
Yep, that sounds good. So I just need a motion that comments be forwarded to staff through the chair. That's all. And we're good to go.
All right, may I have a motion for the comments of the Municipal Heritage Committee to be composed by the chair and sent to staff? Julia, you move it. Seconder? Ian, all those in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed, so it's carried. Do you want your vote recorded, Ron?
No, that's okay, Ethel. I'm okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on then.
Athel, you're muted again.
Ah, when we flipped screens, did it mute? I don't know, because I was talking. Anyway, we now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the designation of the property at 1590 Elm Tree Road in Ops Township.
All right, I'll give the quick overview. This is a property owner request. So it's all pretty feel good. So for those of you who have driven on Highway 7, it's the one at the corner of 7 and Elm Tree Road there on the northeast corner. It's a really cool house. And the property owners are keen to have it protected. So they approached me mid last year or so. And so I pulled the designation report together.
All right, has everyone had a chance to read the designation report? Personally, I've driven by there numerous times, and it's a beautiful building, and I think it's absolutely worthy of designation. And I think Emily's written a wonderful, detailed report on the heritage and the design aspects of the building. My question to Emily is, within your description, you have included items that are on the interior of the building. Are you in fact asking us to designate the items on the inside of the building as well?
Yep. So this is at the request of the owners. So they've
Okay.
asked for a number of interior items to be included in the designation.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, could we have a motion to accept this report and ask the council to designate this property? Ron and Skip. All those in favor? Carried. You got that, Em? Moving on, we have the subcommittee updates. And the
don't think we
first
have
one
much.
is from the Heritage Designation Subcommittee.
That committee hasn't met. I was going to organize a meeting, and then this meeting crept up on me really quickly because our last committee meeting was only 3 weeks ago. So I will set that up with everybody in the next couple weeks so that we can get going on that.
So there is no report. Thank you. From the Outreach Subcommittee, that being the committee that looks after Doors Open and the Osprey Awards.
Same thing. We're meeting in a few weeks. We have a meeting set up. So there's a date for that one, but we haven't met yet.
All right, so what about the sign committee? Well, our chair of the sign committee isn't here, and as a member, and Ian's a member, we haven't had a meeting since the last heritage report. So Pickerel Point cabins. Ron?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of updates since I mentioned the TSW person contact that said that we had a bit more time to try and trace ownership. Now, Angela, she may be a source to help us out here, I think, and I could approach her and see if she may have an idea as to maybe, tracing some ownership on those cabins. I can get in touch with her if you like.
I think there are two things here as a member of that subcommittee that I would request is for us to ascertain whether we can approach that area on the ice.
Yeah.
Because that's an ideal opportunity if we can do that. And because we don't have to rent boats or seek boats or anything. And the second thing is, I would like to see if Angela has within her archives the tax rolls from that area.
Good idea, thanks. Would you like me to do it, Ethel? Ask Angela?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay. So basically, we didn't have an update on that either from this at this point. So we move on to 5.5, the Designated Properties Subcommittee, and I believe there are some updates on this from you, Emily,
Yeah,
relating to
so,
public meetings and whatever.
yeah, so this actually should be the Heritage Conservation District Subcommittee. I put the wrong thing on there. Sorry, that's my fault. I will correct that in the minutes. Obviously, I had something else on the brain there. So we've got a couple things. So the first thing is that the draft study, which has been circulated to the members of the subcommittee, it has been. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm going to keep talking. It's been. Are you coming in? No. Okay. It's been released on the city's website for public review and commenting. A letter will be going out to property owners in the study area next week to let them know that it's there. There's a survey as well that will go along with that, sort of directing people to, some, I guess with some prompts for feedback, and then also some opportunities to give some general feedback on that. And then we're also going to be having 2 public meetings at the end of March to get, just to provide an update on where the study is at, next steps, and then to get some discussion from members of the community. So that's where we're at with the Conservation District study. So we're moving along quickly. The goal is to take it to council in July. We'd like to get it to council before the municipal election, just because the fall is nothing can happen in the fall because there's an election. So it's all up in the air. So we're aiming for the summer to take the final study to council. So we're moving it along.
My job security is not the greatest. See what happens.
I think that that subcommittee should be aware, and the Municipal Heritage Committee should be aware that it's always nice to have as many of us as possible at the public meetings. And
Yeah, so I'll send the invites out directly to everybody. I'll do that, not tonight.
Just a question. I think there's a certain, so Emily, the clerk office would know, there's a certain, I think it's 60 days or maybe 30 days that you can still bring reports and get things passed. I'm not 100% sure on that. We should check, because you can still, business has to keep going on even if there's an election.
Oh, for sure. We're just aiming for July, so it just doesn't get into that. It just makes it a lot easier if we're well before the election. Oh, hi, Daisy.
All right.
your secretary is back, Secretary.
Yes.
All right, any further comments on that? So may we receive the report from Emily for information? May I have mover? Ron, seconder, Ian, all those in favor? Carried. So we move forward to correspondence, and I have received none. Have you received any, Emily?
Nope, no correspondence.
All right, thank you. Any new or other business? None has been submitted to Emily or myself. Unless Daisy has something.
No, I think she just wants to say hi to everybody.
All right,
Okay,
there
get off.
being none, the next item on the agenda is the date of the next meeting. And I have a question. Do you think that will be in the council chamber?
Honestly, I hope so. If as long as we can, as long as the capacity limits allow for it, it should be. So now that things are opening back up, council and committees are transitioning back to having in-person meetings. So as long as whatever the capacity limits are at the beginning of March will support it, then yes, we'll be in council chambers. So yay, we can all meet in person.
It's
And
so
that'll
much
be-
easier than trying to see hands in little windows, especially when there are a lot of people present.
And so just so everybody knows, that'll be a hybrid model, like we did last spring, I guess. So if people are more comfortable being on Zoom, they can be on Zoom. If they want to be in person, they can be in person. So we'll sort that out a little bit closer to the time, who's doing what. But that just gives everybody some flexibility in terms of what they feel comfortable with.
So what is the date of the next meeting?
It is on March 3rd.
March 3rd. All right, thank you all very much for attending, and I would certainly entertain a motion for adjournment. Moved by Julia. Does it require a seconder?
It does. Yep.
Seconded by Ian. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great meeting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All
everyone.
right.